Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. I am the GM Philosopher, and today we are talking about mazes in D&D. How to design them, how to run them, how to make them cool, how to make them interesting, and how to make them non-frustrating and non-overly complex for your characters, okay? Now this question was actually raised by Mikkel6938. Mikkel has requested many videos in the past. Mikkel, thank you so much for always dropping me some awesome requests and for always supporting the channel with amazing comments, insights, thumbs up reactions, and whatnot. Here was Mikkel's question. I've been thinking about how mechanically to have your group navigate a maze with the intention of reaching a certain target while also having interesting encounters along the way. How do you make this fun and not frustrating? So Mikkel, great question. And I just want to pose a challenge to all of you awesome viewers out there. If you have some advice for Mikkel, if you've run mazes in the past, I would love to hear what you have to say. Drop a comment, let me know. Drop your advice, drop the mechanics you've run, drop the stuff that worked well and stuff that didn't work well. Contribute to the conversation. I would love to hear. And as always, if you have a question you'd like the GM Philosopher to answer about D&D or TTRPGs in general, just drop it in the comments. I always grab them, I throw them in a big document, and I just answer them one at a time as I get to them. So thank you so much for that. One more thing before we jump into it, give me a big old thumbs up and a subscribe. This helps me to grow my channel and helps my small channel to get a little bit bigger as time goes on. Like navigating a complicated maze, I'm trying to grow my channel on YouTube, and I would appreciate so much a little helpful thumbs up or a subscribe from you. It means the world to me. Thank you so much. My channel has just reached 2,000 subs, and I am on my way. My next target is 5,000 subs. I believe I can make it. I believe I can level up that much, and I would love for you to help me. Thank you so much in advance for all of your help and involvement. And with that being said, let's dive into this. Now, mazes are something that I have run plenty of in the past. I have run mazes in high level campaigns, and I've also run them in lower level campaigns. I've had them work out really well. And perhaps more importantly, I have run mazes that did not work out very well. And I have a few things to say about this. Here is my take on it. First of all, I believe that mazes should be separated into two different categories. There are really two different types of mazes that we can run. The first is what I call a static or normal maze, okay? This is a fixed layout maze that could be, you could design it in a map, you could print it out, you could even create a map of it on the board and unveil it as you go. So it's like, but it's non-shifting. It's going to remain fixed. And so that's a certain specific type of maze, okay? And in those types of situations, generally the maze themselves are the puzzle. So navigating the maze is a lot like solving a puzzle, okay? Then there is what I call the magical maze or the shifting maze, okay? Some mazes, as you know from D&D, they shift, they change. Such mazes can't really be printed out without a lot of complication and difficulty. And those types of mazes are usually less about actually trying to find your way through the maze as a puzzle, and they're more about accomplishing something in the maze, and then the maze kind of opens and lets you out. The maze serves as more of a backdrop for like a magical situation or thing going on. So in my experience, these are two distinctly different types of mazes, and I kind of want to address both of them a little bit and my kind of approaches to them. Now, first, let's talk about static mazes. Okay, this is relatively simple. You can and should draw out a map for your maze in advance. I think that this adds to the believability and immersion of it. You can print out the map. You can make a tabletop map of it. Personally, I find that this is kind of difficult because then you have to like cover it with something. This works a lot better on like a virtual tabletop, like on Roll20 or something like that. Though I've never run anything on Roll20, I've seen a lot of people do really cool things like this. And so that'd be a great place to do that. But if you're going to run it on a tabletop, what I might actually suggest is that you actually just draw it on a grid and have your map like on a clipboard so you can see it, and then use it as a guide and draw it out as they go. Personally, this is the way that I've always done this type of thing. I think that one of the cool things about running mazes is allowing players to use creative tracking measures. So for example, like ropes, breadcrumbs, having a player like unravel a blanket to use it as a long thread to help them keep their place, right? Using tools and tricks to try to figure out their way through the maze. I like to err on the side of letting players achieve things this way as opposed to like trying to discourage it. You might think to yourself, oh, this is kind of munchkin-y. I kind of wanted them to explore it, but I think it's a really good idea for us as GMs to kind of remember that we want players to engage with our world state. And when players are using creative ways to solve our puzzles, perhaps even faster and better than we would have planned on, this is a great example of you running something awesome. Your players are enjoying it, they're engaging with it. And I don't like to punish players for that kind of thing. So I love it when players break out their creative problem solving and solve the mazes fast and in short order. So with that being said, I also like to incorporate clues. Generally speaking, I'll place clues like parchment scraps or map pieces to help the players navigate. I actually think this is super cool. You could also place pieces of a letter through the maze, and the letter could be like some kind of riddle that'll help them a little bit with the end goal. So maybe finding the way through the maze isn't even the entire thing. Maybe it's about finding all of the pieces of the letter. Maybe it's a spell they'll need or something like that. I think that that's kind of a cool thing. Another thing I want to talk about is with static mazes is simplicity is your friend. You can quickly and easily find big, massive, complicated mazes online, and you might think to yourself, oh yeah, I'm going to run this complicated maze. But if you want to have any encounters in the maze at all, if you want to allow time for player engagement, player creativity, then really having a smaller, more simple maze is going to be your friend, because then you're going to be able, if they take a wrong turn, you can like describe that. If they encounter someone, you can roleplay that out. If they fight a monster, you can roleplay that out, and there can still be time to navigate the maze. So always think smaller, shorter, simpler, unless you want to break this up into a multi-session arc, this one maze. But I find that that tends to get a little frustrating and weird. So personally, I'm thinking very simple, straightforward maze. Maybe there's a right way to go, and then there's like maybe 5 or 6 wrong ways to go. And that's actually it. Pretty simple. Give the players room and time to understand that if they go a wrong way and there's like an encounter or a monster to fight, you might be spending 10 to 20 minutes down every wrong turn. They might make more right turns than wrong turns, but even so, you're looking at half the session just to get through that maze. And that's not including player role play. That's not including players taking time to explore things you didn't even plan on them exploring, etc. Right? So keep it simple, keep it short, keep it basic, and then let the immersion and your storytelling do the trick. Okay. Another consideration with static mazes is that there are ways for players to really fly past these things, literally fly past these things without you realizing it. And you want to plan ahead for that. So if players can fly, if you have a wizard who can cast the fly spell, they might make very short work of your maze if it's an outdoor maze. Same thing goes if players can like turn ethereal and walk through walls. If you have one player who can do that, they can pretty much, it's a little more difficult to figure out the maze with an ethereal power as opposed to being able to fly. If you have a player who can spider climb, they could climb the walls and get to the top. If they're just good climbers, they may stand on each other's shoulders and grab the top, throw rope down, pull each other up, and boom, they're going. So you want to watch out, plan ahead. Think to yourself, if I care about making this a puzzle, I've got to plan ahead and think about all the possibilities that might come about as a result of player creativity and player power level. Okay. Now, another thing that I want to say here is that this isn't always a bad thing. Maybe you should let your flying players easily and quickly fly up above the walls and fly over. Then maybe they get attacked by a griffin or something like that, right? So you can throw other things in, not to punish them for being creative, but just as a sort of like an element of challenge. Even though they're higher level, this maze isn't a big deal. There are other dangers, right? That kind of thing. So just to make it fun, make it interesting, right? You don't want to let it feel like you're punishing players for flying over your maze. You want to be careful of that. So maybe when they first walk into the maze, you might have them roll a perception check and be like, oh, what was that? It's a griffin. So they just know ahead of time, right? That way they don't think you just pulled it out of your butt to punish them and be mean. Anyway, all right. So those are kind of my thoughts on static mazes. And I think that static mazes are cool. I think they're a cool thing to run as like a puzzle. I think that they should be kept short and brief. And best case scenario is they'll find some kind of treasure in the middle of it or something like that, some kind of thing to like make it worth it. All right, now let's talk about a slightly more complicated topic, which is magical or shifting mazes. Okay, now I have run more of these types of mazes, and personally, I tend to prefer these. And basically, the maze in these situations only serves as like the backdrop for a greater adventure. So it's like you're going into the maze. It's like this maze changes all the time. There's no way out unless you solve the puzzle, right? So it's like this is kind of or you beat the monster who developed the maze, or maybe in the middle of the maze there's a drider with a bunch of minotaur minions, and you have to beat them, and you have to take the key to open the door, and that's the only way out of the maze once you get in. Maybe the players are put in the maze by demigod, and they have to find their way out and attack him, right? He put him in there as a prison. It's like a prison maze, but they figure out that they talk to the other prisoners and there is a way out, but no one's brave enough to do it. They have to fight the dragon or whatever it is, right? So it's like the maze and the shiftiness of it is in itself sort of like a prison type thing. So it's like the idea is, oh, this is a place you can't escape. This is a place you actually can't escape unless you perform X, Y, Z functions or solve X, Y, Z riddles or clues or you defeat monster or whatever it is, right? So that's kind of the idea behind these. And in these types of mazes, it's really kind of like any other problem solving type dungeon. They just have to do the thing you want them to do to get out, basically. And you also should allow for creative problem solving in getting out. Generally, by the time a being is powerful enough to have a magical shifting maze that they entrap people in, or by the time one of these has popped up in a natural world, there's going to be like some safeguards. Generally speaking, players are not going to be able to fly out of them. Maybe they fly up and they never reach the top, or maybe they fly up until they run out of oxygen, or maybe it's a situation where if they fly up too much, they get struck by lightning and they continue to get struck until they come down. Or maybe it's a situation where like there is a roof on it and then the walls are magical and they can't ethereally move through. Maybe it's a situation where if they fly up, they do see the maze and they see that it is truly endless. It literally never ends. And even if they fly for 100 miles, they literally do not come to the end of it. Why? It's because the maze itself is just the form of a puzzle that there are specific like keyholes that need to be solved, specific plot points need to be solved, and only then will the maze open up and release them. Could they teleport out of it? Could they plane shift out of it? Now, these are more complex factors. A lot of times what I will do is I will say to players, if you want to teleport out of this maze, you detect there's a lot of magical energy. You're going to use your teleport spell. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to roll percentiles. I personally, I'm not sure if you'd be able to teleport out of this, but I'm going to say that there's a 40% chance you'll be able to teleport out of it. I'm just telling you, GM to player, that's it. So you roll percentiles. If you roll over 60, your teleport works and boom, you're out of the maze. That's just the one player. That, like, if they try to teleport everyone else, then okay, then they roll it. But if they make it out, okay, cool. Now the other players are in there. Obviously, if they teleported the other players out and it worked, boom, they made short work of your maze. But they didn't get the treasure or the gold or whatever it was that was promised in there, right? They just got out. Another thing could be plane shift. Same thing. I give it a 50% chance it's going to work. Roll dice. If you roll over 50, your plane shift works. This doesn't necessarily mean that you get anything out of the maze. Then you've just plane shifted away. So the maze might be its own plane, right? So these are different things to consider. You could consider that while they're on this plane, they're locked in place while they're in the maze. You could say teleportation works the same way. You can kind of work out however you want. Personally, I like to allow for at least the possibility of some open-endedness, but I also like to, as the GM, give players a reason to want to get through the maze. Like, they really want to give them a reason. And then they would want to, go through it as a result of that. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that I've done to enhance the maze experience. First of all, you could introduce small creatures like fairies or glowing bugs into the maze to like guide the players. I've had little like sparkling like insects fly, or little fairy creatures fly and guide the players through the maze, and they kind of guide them to different, the plot points or whatever. I've also had NPCs offer to guide them through the maze. Maybe the NPCs are just excited to see someone. They haven't seen anyone for 1,000 years, so they want to have a conversation. And a lot of times these NPCs will be like socially weird and awkward. It's sort of like the idea of the strange little faun who the players come across, and he's like asking them about their clothes, and he's like, "Can I hold that compass? What is that thing? Oh, why is your hair like that? Can I touch it?" It's just like kind of weird little creatures. And of course, they only speak Sylvan. So if you don't have anyone who speaks Sylvan, they're going to have to cast tongues or comprehend languages to understand him. And so, little things like that, I like to throw those in there just to make them little interesting challenges. And then you can have this NPC, basically, if they're nice to them, they will help them. If not, they'll be like, you were nice to me. I'm not going to tell you how to open that door. So maybe then they have to try to win him back over, that kind of thing. I also like to try to describe the environment vividly to immerse players. Like, I think that this is really important in a maze. You want to kind of give them that feeling of being stuck in a revolving like a maze that they can't escape. And this is, I think, helpful to have them like feel like they're in it. Use sensory details like sounds and lights to create tension and intrigue. This is another thing, is you can have like sounds come either from behind them if you're wanting to spur them onward or from in front of them. Another kind of effect I like is the shadowy figure they're trying to keep up with, like a shadowy female figure pops her head out from ahead. They see her, they call to her, they hear footsteps run away. Like they go try to catch up, but they turn the corner and they don't see her, but they do see, and then reveal some kind of puzzle or whatever. So it's like there's kind of this shadowy figure who stays ahead of them, who they need to catch up with. So I'll just give you a little bit of a story here. One of my favorite mazes I ever ran was the players entered this maze, and basically they got teleported here by one of the gods, and they were trying to fight this big game, like a world-ending boss who was trying to fight the gods, but the gods chose these champions to send to fight him instead because they couldn't interfere in the affairs of mortals, and this guy was technically immortal still. So they sent them to this maze, and they were like, those who are worthy will find their way through the maze and receive what they need to fight this battle. And what they ended up doing was they ended up going through the maze, doing a bunch of like kind of little puzzles and role play stuff, and it ended up about halfway through the session getting to the center of the maze, where there was this big forge with this big minotaur who was like working the forge with a hammer, and it came to be called the God Forge. And it turned out that they could get god level weapons crafted here for their fight against the BBEG. And so what they did was they ended up putting a whole bunch of their magic items. They had collected this massive armory of magical items. So they ended up throwing a bunch of that stuff in there, because the deal was they were going to get certain level power magic weapons from the forge, and they could choose what forms they were going to be. However, if they put their own magic items in, then it would incorporate the power from those, so it would become more powerful weapons. And then also, if they wanted to sacrifice any souls, willing souls could allow themselves to be imbued into the weapons, and then the weapons would become sentient with a little fragment of that soul powering the sentience. And what they did was they had this dragon along with them. They had a little, she started out as being like a pet dragon. She was like a young one. She was like 8 foot long at this point. She was getting pretty big, but she had reached a point where she was more like she thought the party were her pets. And so they kind of like pampered her just to keep her with them. But she had this like ego, crazy ego. And I think if I remember right, she was a brass dragon. But anyway, so they actually ended up convincing her to sacrifice herself in the God Forge. And the reason that she went for it was because they kind of rolled a bunch of really high rolls, and they kind of appealed to her ego, and she realized that if she chose the weapons, she could live forever. However, she made them agree to one stipulation. She made them agree that if all of the weapons that were made were ever to all come into contact and be like placed against each other, in other words, like all the pieces put together, she would reawaken as a much more powerful form with all the power of the weapons included, and it would fuel her emergence. So she would basically be guaranteed to be immortal, also with the possibility of being reawakened at some point in the future. And the fact that she could manipulate or talk or cajole through the weapons gave her the sense that she could probably make this work. So she agreed to it, getting immortality out of the deal, basically getting what she thought might be a great possibility that she would come back bigger and better and stronger. So they sacrificed her in the forge, and they ended up with a collection of sentient dragon soul weapons that were of various forms and had various different kind of interesting effects. I mean, they threw a bunch of stuff in there. They threw scrolls in there, magic weapons. They threw like magical artifacts. I mean, pretty much everything they had. And they came out with these amazing, just god tier weapons. And so that was a pretty fun thing. And then in order to escape the maze, if I remember correctly, they had to like fight somebody. And I think they had to fight this like big demon scorpion thing that was like going to try to steal the weapons. It like basically would wait at the exit of the maze, and anyone who tried to escape, it would try to steal the weapons and claim them for itself. And it was sort of also a test of mettle to see if these characters were even worthy to carry the weapons. So they had to like fight this battle with these weapons. However, that was probably the most successful, most interesting maze I ever ran. So there's a little story for you. It's like, but it was like a magical shifting maze that the gods sent them to, like the god mage, the god forge in the maze of the gods or whatever. So yeah, that is pretty much all I have to say on the topic. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that this has given you a little bit of inspiration. I know the mazes are a little bit of a challenging thing, but they can be so cool. And if you're thinking about running a maze, I would encourage you to just do a little planning, just think a little bit about it. Always remember, simple is better, brief is better. Keep it interesting and brief. It's simple, and you really can't go wrong because remember that it takes a lot longer to get things done in D&D than usually we think they will. As GMs, we tend to have these elaborate plans that'll keep our players guessing. But the truth is that player parties move along a lot slower than our creative brains do, generally speaking. Not always, but sometimes. So, simple, straightforward, less complex, one or two really cool, interesting, complicated things, and then players will have a really great time. All right, that's going to be it for this one. Give me a thumbs up and a subscribe. Thank you so much for dropping by, watching another video. I'm here almost every day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. So until next time, have a good one. Play some D&D, and I will see you on the next video.